911, what is your emergency?
Units respond code 3 to a 1050 on the highway. Vehicles are blocking multiple
We're en route
lanes
to the
of travel.
hospital. Patient is currently having
We got a
cardiac
4-alarm
arrest and has
fire
been
here.
intubated.
Send additional
Protesters are
trucks.
outside of City Hall and they are not complying with our
Out
orders
on one.
to
Hold the
disperse.
air.
In a rapidly changing world for first responders where it seems that every day the rules and norms are changing, there is one voice you can count on to give you the latest in emergency news. That is Lifeline. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lifeline 911 Podcast with your host, Erica.
Hello.
I am your co-host, Gary, and today we are joined by a special guest. Connie Geerhart is a crisis counselor with her police department and has been doing so for 26 years. During that time, she has worked to assist those who have experienced traumatic experiences both in the field and behind the headsets. There have been many occasions where we have used her services as well, and we are very appreciative for them. And we've invited her on the show today to help talk about some of those. Connie, thank you for joining us.
I am so happy to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. I was looking forward to this all weekend.
Same.
Yeah. So I know we talked a little bit before we were on about how long you've been doing this, 26 years, which is absolutely amazing, caring for people. And I know that you care for us. So for anybody who might be listening that does not know what a crisis counselor is, you tell me what that is.
Yes, and I will include that I'm in a slightly different position now because I'm the employee wellness program manager. But that is a very recent. I just started with that in February. So prior to that, I have worked mostly as a crisis counselor on spending some time as either a lead counselor or a supervisor. And we can go into a little bit of why that has been important to be able to take some breaks and step back from the direct service part, as far as my own mental health and well-being. But with crisis counseling, there there are a couple of things that go along with that in the setting of being within a law enforcement agency. So I started out as an intern. I was in graduate school for social work, and I came and did an internship with the Victim Services Unit of the Austin Police Department. And then I ended up getting hired on, and I spent about 8 years in our domestic violence unit. And so this is a unit where you have detectives who are investigating family violence and stalking type crimes. And then we also had other people within the unit, because it was really a team. It included some prosecutors and some people from our local domestic violence shelter and resource center. And our job in that role was to provide follow-up outreach calls to people who had experienced domestic violence and talk with them about the criminal justice process, safety planning, resources, and make some referrals that might be helpful to them. And that involved people who, some of them who wanted to leave the relationship and some of them who wanted to continue with the relationship and maybe didn't want anything to do with the criminal justice system. Wow. And so, so that was that part of my career. And then I moved on to our crisis response team, which is unique to Austin in that we have 24/7 counselors who, at the beginning of their shift, they pick up a car at a substation, kind of like a patrol officer does. They log on to the computer and then they respond to scenes as requested by officers, or sometimes EMS or fire might request us. So that could be anything from a found child to sexual assault, domestic violence, homicide, child abuse, robbery, vehicular homicide. Sometimes we're in people's homes. Sometimes we're out in the middle of the street. And we're doing that immediate crisis intervention of, we're not trying to really dig into people's childhoods or, we're really looking at what's going on right now. How can we help you regulate those emotions? How can we help you get safe? Or how can we connect you to someone who can help keep you safe at this time? And so that was as far as my career is concerned, I loved doing that. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of exposure to direct trauma. And so it's been nice also being able to step away at times and take on like a supervisory role where I'm not dealing with the direct trauma quite as frequently.
That is for those listening, this is really just educational for me. I'm sitting here, if you could just see me right now, my mouth is hanging open because as much as I know about it, I'm realizing in the moment that I know nothing because I had no idea. I had no
Yeah.
idea that for one, that was unique to Austin. Is it still just unique here to your knowledge?
It's not, and I misspoke a little bit. We do have, I believe, in Austin, the largest victim services. We have 16 counselors who are dedicated to our crisis team. So that's how we get our 24/7 coverage. And they work 10 hour shifts every week. And then as far as, counselors, follow-up counselors in some of the different units embedded with the detectives, I'm not going to tell you the exact number because I'm not sure, but it's probably, I'd say when all is said and done and you count supervisors and some of our temp employees, I mean, we're definitely over 50 in total, and it's probably more than that. Um,
Wow.
and then with our wellness, we have the same manager who's over wellness and victim services. And in wellness, we have 2 staff psychologists, a fitness and nutrition person, and then I don't supervise our peer support. Those are sworn, but that's a sergeant and 4 officers, and so they're part of wellness as well. And then we have a few other we have some temp employees, and we have a pet program, the APD pet team, which is we have people who handle dogs who have gone through special training so that they provide a therapeutic intervention, and that isn't extended to the community. That is actually for our in-house to come and visit our 911 call takers, our dispatchers, our police officers, really, our the people who provide custodial services. I mean, pretty much anybody who works within this environment has access to visits from these wonderful dogs. So,
Yes,
and
and
so
the judge is my favorite. He's huge.
I love the judge, the Great Dane judge who thinks he's on SWAT. And I keep, of course, not answering the question, which is there are other programs within the country that do provide victim services within a police department and do provide on-scene response, but it is difficult to get the level of, funding and commitment from a department and from city leaders to grow as big as we have. So we've been very fortunate in that regard. So for example, there is the county that Austin is in, there's the Travis County Sheriff's Office, and they also have a victim services, and they do respond to scenes, but that is 100% on call. And they use a lot of volunteers as well to be able to cover that. Yeah, and so I actually did work over there for a little while as well. And that was being on call. Anybody out there who has ever been on call, man, it is tough. It adds a whole new layer of stress to your life. So,
I can
um,
imagine.
yeah. So that is, and as far as whether there are other agencies in the country where they have like a 24/7 crisis response to the scene, I'm not aware of it, although it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
So you mentioned responding to us at 911 because it's no
Yes.
secret. It
Yes.
is and I know we kind of decided we were going to talk about trauma exposure. So,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to figure out how to phrase my question because I got like 15 of them going on in my head at the same time. I'm trying to form an actual sentence. So, if we're going to say trauma exposure, how
Mhm.
what does that look like in people like Gary and I who work in 911?
Yeah. So it's a great question, and it's something that actually may start for many people before they ever come into this job. So um, there is, and you may have heard of this, there is something called the ACE score, and ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it is it's a list of I can't remember how many items are on it. It might be 10 items that are things that if you experience them as a child, they add up, and research has shown that the more higher things people have, higher number of things they have as far as adverse childhood experiences, the more likely they are to have some, potentially negative health outcomes, including physical and mental health. And I almost even hesitate to separate physical and mental health because it really is connected. We think brain and body, but it's all one. It's all together. Um,
Okay.
and so when you look at the people, anybody who you're working with, and it doesn't matter if you're working in a police department or anywhere else, you have coworkers who have had experiences either as children or outside of work. And some of these things include like growing up with a parent who is dealing with a substance use disorder, or experiencing physical abuse, or witnessing physical or sexual abuse. These are some of the different things that may come up. And when we're children, you know that is when we are um we're helpless, we're very vulnerable, and we need
Hmm.
to have a safe adult presence in our lives. And if we don't, then we have to figure out how to adapt to that, and we adapt. We do some amazing things to adapt, but those may not end up serving us as well into adulthood. But it's a pretty interesting measure. Anyone can Google, adverse childhood experiences. There's actually a great TED talk where somebody talks about that and some of the research. So I mention that because when you think about people who are drawn to workplaces that are either I'm going to be able to help people. I'm going to be able to help people who need to get help. We see that in a lot of police officers, and we see that in a lot of people who are interested in 911 and dispatch. I
Yeah.
want to be part of a helping profession. I want to support people in times of crisis. And sometimes, not for everybody, but sometimes that comes from a place of, hey, I've had experiences in my life where I was vulnerable or I needed help, and I now want to translate that into helping others. So that's one thing we see. The other thing we see is that if you grow up in an environment, or if you've experienced a lot of chaos and unpredictability in your life, that can end up kind of being your norm, and you can be really drawn to things that are chaotic and exciting. And
Yeah.
um, so we also see that in police officers, and we see that in people who are drawn to 911 and dispatch, where it's like you're right there, you're in the thick of things. It's exciting, it's interesting. And and I would say that both of those reasons, like if somebody sits back and they're really honest with themselves and they say, "Well, I do this job because it's exciting." That's
Yeah.
okay. It doesn't have to be, that's not a bad thing that this is exciting to you. Um, where it becomes, troublesome is if that excitement ends up interfering in your ability to self-regulate when you're trying to help others, and also co-regulate. And I'll explain a little bit about what that means. So when I am having a conversation with somebody, let's use the example of Thanksgiving dinner. Most of us, when we meet up with families or Friendsgiving, we are not always in a situation where we have the same exact opinions as everyone else.
I'm sorry. Really, Connie? Shocking. Okay.
Really, it is shocking. And we see that. I mean, the most common example I hear people bring up is politics, of course, is that
Mm.
if you're sitting around at Thanksgiving, boy, all that stuff's going to come out, and you're going to, you may have that family member, that relative, or you may be that family member, that relative who likes to
Wow.
poke the bear. And
Mm-hmm.
and let's really get into it, and and so one of the things that is really helpful for all of us is if we have the capacity to self-regulate. And what that means is when I am in a conversation with someone and I start to feel and notice that the heat rising, either I'm starting to feel, angry or sad or frustrated, or I feel like I'm about to cry, or I feel like I am, that I'm not seeing straight.
Wow.
That's a state that's not going to fare. I'm not going to fare well in a political discussion with Uncle George, who, by gosh, he has his beliefs and they are, maybe polar opposite of mine. I'm not going to be able to find common ground when I am in a state of, I fight, flee, fawn. There are a lot of different terms, a lot of different ways the body can go.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm in that, I need to be able to self-regulate. And there are some different ways of doing that. And one way, and it's really simple, and this is something that people, even who are being call takers or dispatchers, can do if in their job they find themselves feeling, heightened emotions and their nervous system is going all haywire, is even just standing up and marching in place and swinging your arms. And that's, I'm going to say that if you're dispatching or call taking, you may not be able to do that with your arms if you're having to type stuff in.
I'm
But
picturing this at the Thanksgiving table, by the way, and it's pretty
Yeah.
funny.
Yes, I mean, honestly, being able to physically get up and do that and swing your arms and stand, that is actually, it's going to be really hard for you to be feeling the intense whatever it is while you're also doing that. And I'm not a neuroscience scientist. I'm not a doctor. So my capacity for describing what's going on with the chemicals in your body is not great. Although I can make a lot of book recommendations if somebody wants to go down that road to do the deep dive. But yeah, so that's one thing. But the other, I'm glad you pointed that out, Gary. It's a very visible thing. Everybody's going to know you're doing it, which to me is kind of hilarious and great. But you may also be like, I can't do that. I'm in an environment where I can't even get up and do that. So that's when there are some other things that can be really helpful. And that includes lots and lots of breathing techniques out there. And I'm sure most people have heard of at least one breathing technique. I'll tell you one that I've been using recently that I learned from, we had somebody named Erica Gaines with TAC Mobility. She does a lot of training for law enforcement, including, she does them in person, but she's also got a very active Instagram feed. She does use a lot of swear words. If anybody's opposed to that, don't check her out.
Nice.
But she came and did a little training for some of the folks here, and she taught us some different breathing techniques. One of which I really liked. I cannot remember the explanation for why it works, but she used the example of how if you've ever noticed you might have a pet, or you maybe have noticed it with people, where they'll suddenly double sniff. Like they'll be breathing in and then they'll sort of at the height of the breath, they'll sniff in a couple more times.
Mm-hmm.
And she explained the mechanism of this. I can't explain it, but it has something to do with, in your lungs, you have those little air sacs called alveoli, and that double sniff makes sure that the oxygen is getting to those. that it may not always get to. And so lately what I've been doing is just that. And I'll do it when I'm in bed, and I'll breathe in deep. And then once I've breathed in deep, I'll do an extra double breath in.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
hold it for a second or two and then let it out. And it's pretty remarkable. And you do that 10 times. I mean, you might hyperventilate, but you will also sort of clear the space, clear the air, so to speak.
Okay.
So that's one of many, but that is something you can do. And really people aren't so much going to notice that you're doing that. And that is one of the ways that when I'm talking about self-regulation, and there are 1,000 different ways, we could have a whole different podcast just on that.
Don't tempt me
Then
with a good time. Yeah.
Oh, Erica, I love you. Yes.
You will be back.
So then when I mentioned co-regulation, that I'm referring to so as humans, we are relational. We, for the most part, with, a few offbeat exceptions, most of us are going to, that's part of our humanity, is that we connect with other people. And some of us get, connect with many people, and we want to, we often call them extroverts, people who like to be around and get energy from being around other people. But some of us, it might be, they're just a few close people. I will hearken back to that ACE score I was talking about. You could have a child who has a really high ACE score and has dealt with a lot of stuff, but studies have shown that if they have one caring, consistent adult in their life, doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, that can mitigate some of the impact of those scores. So I always like to give a shout out to Big Brothers Big Sisters program. If you ever want to make a difference, I really encourage people to do that. I don't have children myself, but I decided to. Well, first told my husband, when I retire, we're going to foster children. And then I said, well, let me try being a big sister first. And it's like slightly lower stakes. And, but anyway, it's a wonderful program. It's all throughout the United States. And it's a great way of doing that and making a difference. So anyway, down that rabbit hole. So
No. This is great.
This is what I do.
And this is what we do.
But
Think
then
about it. Everybody, our real audience, though, Connie, this rabbit holes, that's what we do all day long.
Exactly. Your attention gets diverted to one thing and then to another thing. And it's like, okay, how do I bring this back?
I would like to say that before we had started, Connie, you were like, "Oh, I don't know if I've prepared enough. I don't know if I'm going to be able." And then like you've just spoken 20 minutes extemporaneously on this topic, so I think your many years of service doing this have served you well.
Absolutely,
it has helped. It has
is-
helped. It has helped.
You need no preparatory, no prep anything. This is absolutely amazing because it's it's spontaneous and it's in the moment. That's what I love about it. So
Well,
I think
I
go ahead.
could. Oh, go ahead. No, I think I could absolutely, I could talk about this stuff for days, but I do want to bring it back to when you have that idea of co-regulation. What you have in the form of your 911 call takers, especially, they are in the business every day, multiple times a day, of trying to co-regulate. So they're in relation with a caller on the other end of the phone for maybe 2 minutes, sometimes less, sometimes more. And they are talking to this person who may be having the worst day of their life, or at least are in significant enough distress or witnessing distress that they feel that they need to dial those 3 numbers. And I don't know about you guys, if you've ever had to call 911. I know I have on a few occasions, just from, seeing or witnessing something, but it's a big deal. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, am I really going to do this? Do I need to do this? And then you make that call. And I've even noticed it with myself. I remember one time seeing a guy who was clearly appeared to be disoriented. I don't know whether he was on something or what was going on for him, but he was kept walking out into the roadway on the side of, our major highway, and not on the highway proper, but on the frontage road.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, do I call? But then he kept going into the street. I was like, oh, he's going to get hit. So I was like, yeah, I got to call. So I
Yep.
pulled over. But even just in calling, my own nervous system was hyperactive. I
Yep.
was a little bit breathy. And I
Mhm.
wasn't personally in any danger. I was safely in my car, but my whole being was, I think, maybe even sort of preparing myself to see somebody get hit by a car, which would have
Mhm.
been very distressing. And so this call taker on the other line has to help me regulate, whether or not he or she knows that that's what they're doing, by speaking to me in a calm, direct voice, by helping to focus my attention and ask questions. What is the person wearing? Where's the person now? All those things are helping me to lift myself out of my intense sort of hypervigilance and to calm down a little bit so that I can share the
Wow.
information. So every day, those 911 call takers doing it over and over and over again. And so if you combine that with the things they may bring to them from work, either from their own childhood or their own lives,
Mhm.
and needing to self-regulate, and then multiple times a day, having people call in who are in a heightened state and having to help them down-regulate, basically, it is a job that takes a very, very special person. And it is a miracle that they come back after the first day. Quite honestly.
It is. You are so
Yeah.
right. And I'm sitting here just listening to this. That the last, I don't know, 3-4 minutes, whatever it's been, where
Yeah.
you are describing this and the difference that it makes to you, I think is something. If a listener gets nothing else from this conversation, if they are a 911 operator or a dispatcher, if they don't take anything else from this conversation, just listening to the impact that it has on the caller
Yeah.
when they are calm, and it just takes their service to another level, I think. Because most of us have no idea that that's what they're doing. They don't know. They think they're just taking a call.
Right. It's routine for them. And and so when they have somebody on the other end of the line, and a lot of times, I've one of my favorite things to do is to sit in with 911. It's fascinating to me. And for I will have this happens to me also when I'll go on an officer ride out, or I'll sit with 911, and at the end of the day or the end of the, hour, they'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry, it was kind of boring tonight." And I'll say, "What? That wasn't
Yeah.
boring. That was
Yeah.
so interesting." But to them, if it didn't include somebody actively being murdered,
Yeah.
it it feels to them like, it was really routine, it was boring. And it's like, no, because when there's a trigger every time and I don't know how it is with other dispatch and call centers, but when they've got their headphone on, and if there's enough staffing, or if it's a slow time, like, maybe 4 to 5 a.m., there may be, some seconds or some minutes between calls.
Mhm.
So, they kind of might be sort of chilling out a little bit. But then there's this noise that comes on, and it's not alarming, but it's like a beep. And then they hear in Austin, it's their own recorded voice saying, "Austin 911, do you need police, fire, EMS, or mental health?"
Yep.
So they hear that. And when I'm listening in as a civilian observer listening to this, when I hear that beep, Austin 911, I get a jolt. I get
Mhm.
excited.
Mhm.
And now hopefully, if you work there, you don't get that jolt every single time, because that would be a lot of stress hormone and cortisol in your
Yes.
system. Um, But, so every time they hear that, well, then on the other end of the line, you just don't know what you're going to get. And so having to assess in real time in that moment, there are not a lot of jobs out there where that's what you have to do. Most people in their jobs, they're able to prepare, they're able to have downtime, or like, here, I have a
Mm-hmm.
script. And
Mm-hmm.
no matter what, you can have, even in 911, you can say, like, okay, I need you to try to answer these questions, which of course adds stress. They're like, I'm trying to get these questions answered, and this person is like so dysregulated on the other end.
Yeah.
But even with that, you have to have some skill at helping to support that person with where they're at, where they're coming to you from. And they're not going to be able to answer that question of, do you see any weapons, if they are just, hysterically crying. You're going to have to spend a little bit of time, bringing that down. And really the only tool you have are your words and your voice. And
Yeah.
so, like, if I'm meeting with someone in person, I have body language, I have physical proximity. They don't have that. And so it's like their voice is their superpower.
That is amazing. So I'm thinking to myself, we have got to figure out a way before you leave us, Connie, to go off into the great beyond of retirement, which I'm still trying to figure out who I can call to make sure that doesn't happen. Oh, wait, I said that out loud. My bad. Um, we got to
It's nice.
figure out a way.
It's nice to hear people threatening to take my paperwork away from me. And I tell them, this is not the 1980s. It's all electronic. You can't get in there.
Oh, that's messed up. So what I'm glad to know is that I'm not the only one. So, okay, I'm not crazy. I feel I'm not alone in this feeling that we're losing a treasure. But of course,
Well,
when that time comes, it'll be well earned.
I will tell you this. Even though I'm going to retire from working with the city, my dedication, my care, my concern for people doing this work, first responders of any type, and that includes police, fire, EMS, dispatchers, and call takers, and crime scene technicians, all of those folks, or people who supervise those folks, truly. I plan to do private practice, and I really want to, and I really want to be able to serve these folks, because it is a unique job and a unique challenge, and being able to have service providers in the community who can have some understanding, not fully, I haven't done the job of being a dispatcher or being a police officer, but having some understanding of that, I think could potentially be beneficial. So I would be happy to join the podcast as well when I'm at that point, unless you get feedback on this podcast that says, wow, she talks on and on and on, and it's kind of exhausting. So
Not at all. No, I'm serious.
occupational hazard.
I'm trying to figure out how we can get you to do something that tells these people just how superpower-ish they are. Because I think they just don't know it. I think I'm going to say this,
Yeah.
and I hope it doesn't come out the wrong way, but I think as agencies, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, we train them, we bring them in, we train them, we give them interview techniques, we put them through the paces so that it becomes automatic muscle memory, the repetition building skill, that kind of thing. We do that, and we do that well. We turn out a product that is a call taker or dispatcher who can do this work. But what we don't do is mentally and or emotionally prepare them for the impact that they are going to either have on others or what it's going to do to them. We don't do that. And I don't know why we don't do that. But we have a treasure called the Victim Services Unit that we can tap into.
Yes.
I just think that we don't
And
use you guys enough.
well, and I think too, that's the other thing is, as you think about this, and you think about, different crime types that these folks are exposed to every day. I used the term first responder, but sometimes, and this is something that the medical examiner, they call themselves the last responder. But
Wow.
sometimes, yeah, I
Wow.
know. but sometimes that includes, that can include our 911 call takers. They may be the last responder in that,
Mhm.
when somebody is near end of life or witnessing end of life. And so the power of their voice, and I will say dispatchers too, having been on our crisis response team, and we, carry handy talkies, the police radio, and listening to them as they interact with all sorts of sassy, saucy people. Like sometimes, they and dispatchers and police officers have this like great symbiotic relationship. And then sometimes somebody gets a little sassy. I'm not going to say it's always the police officer. Sometimes it's the dispatcher gets a little sassy.
Sometimes
And
shocking. No, Connie, that does not happen. Whatever are you talking about?
that does happen. And you see that and you think like these are people who, I mean, are literally, like the name of your podcast, the lifeline. I mean, we wouldn't, the people on the street would not be operating if it weren't for that call center.
Mhm.
And so, but man, like when you start experiencing maybe some frustration or some feelings of overwhelm, and you can't avoid it. You can know muscle memory, you can know everything perfectly. And in all the years that I've done the work that I've done, I had somebody ask me, and this is usually graduate students who are going into the field of social work, and they love to hear. You guys should do a whole podcast called Mistakes, just called
Ooh.
Mistakes Were Made, because
Okay.
people love to hear about the mistakes that get made. And like, I'll give you an example. I had a colleague who called me the other day, and she had she wasn't working, but she had turned on her police radio and
Oh dear.
accidentally bumped the mic. And then she got a page and they said, "Hey, you bumped your mic. Are you okay?" And she called me and she was like, "Am I going to get in trouble because I bumped the mic?" And I was like, "No, that happens all the time. It's fine. I mean, did you say anything terrible when you
Yeah,
bumped the
yeah, no
mic?"
kidding. Yeah.
But I think what's interesting about that, or what strikes me about that is, we're dealing with like, radio communications. Is it the FCC or who monitors that? Somebody monitors that.
Yeah, it is.
And and so and so even though like you want to be able to be, I mean, I don't know about you. I do know about you guys, you have a sense of humor,
Yeah.
and cops have a sense of humor, and dispatchers have a sense of humor. And it's like you kind of want to put some of that in there to lighten it up, and but you also got to be careful.
Hmm.
And you can end up cutting all this if you want. It's kind of a side
Nope,
thing, but I
nope,
have to
nope.
tell
Go.
I have to tell you one of my very favorite stories, where I was listening to, and it was a sergeant, I think, who was pulled over. He had pulled over on the side of the road because there was a disabled vehicle, and the driver of the vehicle, was there with the car, and the sergeant had pulled over to help them. And and somebody else comes up on the air to ask, or the sergeant comes up on the air and asks for one of our hero units. And hero, I can't remember what it stands for. Do you guys know?
Oh,
Highway.
Highway
highway.
emergency
It
response operations, I think.
There we go. Highway
show off.
Emergency Response Operations. There's Gary on the acronym, Johnny on the spot there. And he requests that from dispatch, and dispatch, says, "Yeah, I'll send him out." And then another officer comes up, and says, "Hey, oh, hey, Sarge, do you need me to relieve you?" And Sergeant doesn't hear it. And the dispatcher, is trying to get a hold of him. Is like, calling his call sign, like, Baker 390, Baker 390. And he says, and he finally, comes up on the radio, and the dispatcher says, "Do you need, Baker 101 to relieve you," or whatever? And he
Oh no.
says, and some of your people are not going to get this reference. But he comes up in the air and he says, "No, thanks. I'm holding out for a hero till the end of the night."
Nice.
Oh, Bonnie Tyler.
Bonnie
Nice.
Tyler. And I
Nice.
just, it made me laugh, and I was like, oh my gosh. So anyway, it's a little thing, but sometimes, the humor also is a helpful self-regulator.
That song is going to be in my head now. I'm old enough to know that song. And so there
God,
it
I
is.
hope
It's
so.
there. It's going to be there until 10 o'clock tonight. Okay. All right. It's
There
there.
you go. Try to work that into a conversation at some point during the evening.
Nice.
Thank you guys. This has been so much fun and so interesting. I love the work that you do, and the work that all of our wonderful people in communications do. It is truly just, it's an essential, to talk about the meaning of the word essential. It is an essential position, and we are just so lucky to have the folks we have.
Well, Connie, thank you so much for joining us. We really have appreciated your insights and knowledge about trauma and the experiences and like how to deal with that. And we appreciate you being with us on the show today.
Thank you so much. It has been my pleasure, and I'm excited for everything that comes next with Lifeline 911.
Well, thank you.
Awesome.
And thank you all for listening today. We hope that you found the episode as intriguing and informative as we have. And from all of us at Lifeline 911 Podcast, I'm Gary.
I'm Erica.
And we will see
And
you.
I'm Connie. I messed that up.
No, it's
Nope,
good. It's good.
no, it's good. Yes.
Mistakes were made. Here we go.
Nope.
We will see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching our production of Lifeline 911 Podcast. If you have any questions about the topics we discussed today, or if there's something specific you'd like us to cover in a future episode, send us your questions at lifeline911podcast@gmail.com. Stay safe out there. Until next time, this is Lifeline 911 signing off.